I'm going to throw a German word at you.
Oh, no.
Jawohl. Schadenfreude.
I knew it.
I've been coming across that a lot.
That's a
lately.
bad word.
I wonder how many of you, other than Carolyn, know what that is.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, I can tell at least two of you. And I know Crystal does too. Because I mentioned it last Sunday at lunch, or the last time we were at lunch together. For those of you who are not in the know, Schadenfreude is rejoicing at the misfortune of another. A classic example is the cartoon where the bad guy, whoever that happens to be, is chasing the good guy, whoever that happens to be, and runs right over a banana peel and slips, flies through the air and falls down. We all laugh. We like to see the bad guy get what's coming to him, don't we? Well, fess up, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's a particularly mild example of Schadenfreude. The next thing to it is the lead foot behind you who wants to go highway speed in a 35 mile an hour zone, and when you're in the right hand lane, zooms around you, gets in front of you, and gets stopped at the next light.
Yes. Or gets pulled over by a police officer.
Oh, even better.
Yeah. So you pulled over about 2 miles up the road.
Yeah. The temptation to indulge in Schadenfreude is all too real. And it's something that it's easy to slide into before you realize it, especially nowadays, and with certain political figures. More than once I heard someone express a wish to dance on a particular politician's grave, and people on both sides of the aisle do it. So, lest you start trying to figure out who I meant. I didn't mean anybody in particular. I've heard it both ways. Just recently, I came across a post on Facebook which asked the question: if you woke up to breaking news that Air Force One went down with the President, the VP, and the Speaker of the House on board, what would be your response? Anybody care to hazard a guess about the overall tone of the comments? Let's just say that the responses I saw weren't expressions of sorrow. For some people, the temptation to put on a recording of the Hallelujah chorus would be too much to resist. In January 1993, I flew up to Washington, D.C. with a friend of mine who worked for U.S. Air. We were on the National Mall for Bill Clinton's first inauguration, and my friend and I got to talking with the people nearest us in the crowd. Now, some folks weren't particularly pleased when the outgoing president, George H.W. Bush, showed up. I remember in one of Judith's sermons years ago how she explained that she, like so many of us, I suspect, was always being told not to be ugly when she was growing up. Well, some of the folks in that crowd were being ugly. They started booing Mr. Bush when he was announced. But the people we were talking to reminded everybody that booing the outgoing president from the other party wasn't who we are as Americans. Don't you wish that somebody would remind people of that nowadays? Besides, they said, after the next election, the party situation could be reversed. The next president could well be somebody you don't like. And take another example. One evening, right after John Lennon's murder on the 8th of December 1980, I was eating in the dining room at Guilford College. One of my friends made a joke that surprised me. He said he expected that Lennon was just now finding out whether there really was no hell below us. My friend, of course, was referring to the lyrics of the song Imagine, as well as to the time when Lennon remarked carelessly in an interview that the Beatles were more popular than Christ. Well, I looked him straight in the eye and I said, I don't think that's a bit funny. Not when somebody's been murdered like that. I don't care who it is. I'm glad to say that by all accounts, my friend has learned better since then. The temptation to give in to Schadenfreude is very real, but it's not the way it's supposed to be. The Bible is very clear on the subject in both Testaments. He who mocks the poor insults his maker. He who is glad at calamity will not go unpunished, which is Proverbs 17:5. Do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and let not your heart be glad when he stumbles, lest the Lord see it and be displeased, and turn away his anger from him. Proverbs 24:17-18. But you should not have gloated over the day of your brother in the day of his misfortune. You should not have boasted in the day of distress. You should not have gloated over his disaster in the day of his calamity. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head. Obadiah, which is only one chapter, verses 12-13 and 15b. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Repay no one evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. Romans 12:15 and 17. Jewish tradition has continued this emphasis. One of the major portions of the Passover Seder nowadays is the recitation of the plagues on Egypt before the Exodus. There's a very famous interpretive story, or midrash, about the parting of the Red Sea. When the waters came back together to drown the Egyptians who were chasing the escaping Israelites, the story says that the angels of God began to sing in celebration. Either it was the time of day when the angels bring their sacrifice of praise before the Almighty anyway, or they were specifically celebrating the deliverance of Israel. The story continues that the Holy One silenced them, saying, "My children are dying, and would you rejoice?" The Haggadah follows this with a statement that, "Thus we are shown, and we should always remember that our victory is diminished by the death of our foes." Then, as the plagues are recited one by one, you dip your finger into the cup of wine or grape juice that you're drinking. You put a drop of the liquid onto your plate for each plague, so that you end up with 10 of them, in memory of all the Egyptians who died. In other words, compassion for your opponents is written into the tradition and reinforced annually, which is the very opposite of Schadenfreude. Now, we all had to read Shakespeare in high school, didn't we?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Every year.
Let's see. I didn't have to read him in 11th grade, but that's only because we were doing American lit that year. Many of his plays deal with the terrible things that happen when the social bonds break down or are deliberately violated. Makes for good theaters, often great theater, but a terrible lived experience. Yet Schadenfreude, on an intimate personal level, is just the first step. It's succeeded by vitriol on the societal level, which is where we are now. But before we talk about Shakespeare anymore, let's take a look at one of the most loved stories in the New Testament, the parable of the Prodigal Son. You get the impression that the brothers in Jesus' story aren't all that close. Some commentators even suspect that the sons may not have had the same mother. In fact, biblical scholar Amy Jill Levine has remarked that the instant Jesus opened his mouth and said, "A certain man had 2 sons," his audience, who were all Jewish, would have known two things. First, the sons did not get along. Think Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, Esau and Jacob, Joseph and his brothers, David and his brothers, and the tensions among David's sons. And the other thing is that the father wasn't particularly effective in persuading the sons to get along. Now let's go back to Shakespeare. How many of you remember having to read or watch a performance of King Lear? A number of us. Well, the family dynamics in King Lear are rather like the ones in the parable, aren't they? Now, this is what actress Judi Dench, who is possibly the most famous currently living Quaker in the entire world, has to say about Lear's three daughters. Quote, "Doesn't sound as if they were close, does it? I've always had a feeling that Goneril and Regan are quite a bit older than Cordelia. They're so ghastly to her, embittered and jealous on account of all the attention that their little sister has received. Cordelia probably had all the best presents growing up. And I've always imagined that Lear was much more demonstrative and tactile with her. Things like that would rankle with her older siblings. You can understand it from everyone's point of view." End quote. Understandable, yes, but still tragic. And what's the result? Civil war and lots of death all around. And that's just what happens on stage when the relationships in one family, albeit the royal family, break down. Imagine what happens nationally when the same forces play out. Bitterness escalates from the personal to the societal in the blink of an eye. And tragedy is the result. We just have to look at our own history. In March of 1861, on the steps of the unfinished Capitol building in Washington, D.C., Abraham Lincoln spoke these immortal words. "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." Just think of all the heartbreak and bitterness that this country could have been spared if his words had only been heeded. Just over 4 years and much devastation later, in July of 1865, two of my great-great-grandparents on my mother's side, George W. Lamar and Lacey Ann Jordan, got married. Some of you may have seen the old ambrotype that I used to have of him that perished in the house fire 12 years ago. She was a local girl, while he was a Union soldier from Shelby County, Indiana, just southeast of Indianapolis. After they wed, George took Lacey with him back up to Indiana to live with his people, and that's where their first few children were born. But they came back down here after a few years because, as family oral tradition says, she didn't like it up there. Yet there might have been another reason that their stay in Indiana turned out to be temporary. Besides the social acceptability of a newly married couple going home to live with the groom's family, at least at first, there was the destruction in the South to consider. Now, North Carolina was probably among the least devastated states, but still, it might be that the Lamars moved south to North Carolina when things started to improve economically. But the major problem facing the country then wasn't economic, and it wasn't even racial. The biggest problem was how people would start living together again in peace and in some measure of harmony now that they weren't actively trying to kill each other. It's tragic that they decided to put race on the back burner and that it stayed there for a century. But the bitterness from the war and its aftermath was so great that I honestly can't think of a way that they could have done things differently, at least at first. Well, that's where we are now. The bitterness lingered and has resurfaced. We haven't had a civil war, but we are more alienated from each other than at any point since the 1960s. Nobody lives forever. And one day the current situation will change as people die off. Now, this may sound crass, but it's also the truth. When the current time of discord ends, we will have to find our way back to each other. And we'll have to do it over and over and over again until it becomes second nature. And what if we don't? It occurs to me that we might be experiencing our own version of Oliver Cromwell right this very minute. Remember, I mentioned last week that I was going to bring up Oliver Cromwell. In case you're not familiar with the history, Oliver Cromwell was a general on the parliamentary side in the English Civil Wars. He was aligned with the Puritans, the religious group who wanted to stage a hostile takeover of the Church of England from the inside. And they did it. For 11 years, the Puritans ruled England, Scotland, and Ireland, plus the burgeoning American colonies, in a textbook example of what happens when zeal becomes intolerance and cruelty. They closed the theater, and the army went round smashing stained glass windows in churches. And they went after anyone who disagreed with them. Their co-religionists over here in Massachusetts kept trying to banish Quakers from the colony and eventually hanged 4 of us. This is an important period of history for us because it was in the middle of the lifetime of George Fox and right at the birth of Quakerism. But what was the upshot? Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans created what has been called a failed state that died with him. Barely a year and a half after Cromwell's death, the previous king's heir was invited back to reign as Charles II. And the Royalist Parliament set about passing laws to make it harder for religious dissenters even to meet and hold worship. This lasted until 1689, when the English Bill of Rights gave them some freedom of conscience. And the Puritan paradise was succeeded by an era notorious for its sensuality. The Puritans' modern spiritual descendants should take note, because some of the same trends seem to be happening in this country right now. Real Christianity is being shoved aside by so-called Christian nationalism. In the minds and hearts of an entire generation, and they don't like what they're seeing in the church or the state. Certainly not in the effort to link the two. Now, sometimes church people talk about being born again, and that's about as far as they get. But the thing is, you're not supposed to stay a spiritual baby. You're supposed to grow up. And we Quakers are hardly the only ones to say so. Responsible people, people of goodwill in all denominations, say this. In the words of the second Isaiah, "Who among you will give ear to this, will attend and listen for the time to come?" Which is Isaiah 42:23. Has anybody seen the Helen Mirren movie, The Queen? Show of hands. Okay. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it takes place during that incredible first week of September 1997. between the sudden death of Cousin Diana, as I call her, and her funeral in Westminster Abbey on the 6th. As the film builds toward its climax, the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, loses his temper because he's fed up with the way that everybody, the media, the general public, even members of his own government, seems to be baying for the blood of an aging head of state who's just doing her best to cope with the worldwide mourning for her daughter-in-law. Blair even remarks to his wife that there's something ugly in the way everyone started to bully this elderly woman who's trying at the same time to protect her grandsons who have just lost their mother. I was reminded of this just the other week when another person at Bible study made a very similar point about the current situation in this country. She noted that we're watching the decline of an elderly, sick man play out right in front of us in real time. And yet some of the same people who would recoil in horror at the notion that we would mock Grandpa for being incontinent are doing the very same thing when it comes to one particular public figure. Whether you agree with him or not, and I suspect I know the answer, is it right? Is it compassionate? Or is it just ugly? The warnings have been coming in for quite a while now. In retrospect, Rodney King's plea during the Los Angeles race riots of 1992, which were sparked when an almost all-white jury acquitted 4 white policemen on a charge of beating him, sounds almost plaintive. People, I just want to say, can we all get along? Can we all get along? And as much as I want to believe in the possibility, we can't just sing or promise to love our way out of this one. We have to make a deliberate choice to turn away from enmity, bitterness, and the resulting Schadenfreude in order to do better, and we have to make that choice anew every day. A close friend of mine, whose wife is Jewish, came across this prayer in a temple service last year and shared it with me. I'm going to share it now with you because I think it offers light for our path going forward. Lend us the wit, O God, to speak the lean and simple word. Give us the strength to speak the found word, the meant word. Grant us the humility to speak the friendly word, the answering word. And make us sensitive, God, sensitive to the sounds of the words which others speak. Sensitive to the sounds of their words and to the silences between. And in the same vein, Molly Bolton, who holds a master's degree in divinity from Wake Forest, right across the road here, and is a spiritual director, poet, and liturgy writer located up in Boone, has given us what may well be the perfect mantra for the current situation, as well as for the time to come. At any rate, it seems an appropriate place from which to enter the silence. We will not stop loving each other. We will not become hard-hearted. We will not stop weeping for each other. We will not stop lighting candles, telling stories, writing poems, singing songs. We will not stop marching, disobeying, boycotting, resisting. We will not stop telling the stories of the dead. We will not stop fighting for the living. We will not stop loving each other. No matter the sinister untruths to sway us otherwise, we will find our way back to one another. We will not stop loving each other. Amen.